All right, hello and welcome. I'm Laura Brandenburg from Bridging the Gap, and I'm here today with Julie Ayres from Perth in Western Australia. Hi, Julie.
Hi, Laura. So good to meet you.
I'm so excited to do this as well. Julie had commented on one of our recent online trainings about her results with the VA Essentials Masterclass. It was quite a few years ago, actually, that you participated in it. But I'm so grateful that you wanted to share a little bit of your story and your transition plan and your path in business analysis. So thank you.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, if you could just kind of take us back to where you were before you chose to invest in the course. I know you were running a business and kind of starting to return back to corporate work, but kind of just tell us the story of before.
Okay, so I've been in IT for many years through lots of different roles. I got to a point in my career where, looking back now, I can see that I was probably burnt out, but I had lost the passion for what I was doing. And it was one of those seriously wake up one day and I'm going to open an organic store and cafe. I had no idea where it came from, but it was obviously in my subconscious there for a while. And then a number of things started lining up for me. So I was actually made redundant from my role. They were moving the office from Perth to Sydney, and I wasn't interested in moving interstate to the other side of Australia. So I opened up an organic store and cafe over a period of 7 years. The store was open for 6 years. That was my passion, but it was the hardest thing I've ever done in my whole entire life.
I think retail is anything with brick and mortar just terrifies me from a business perspective.
Yeah, and particularly that was like a massive transition in the retail industry because online shopping hadn't taken off. It was just starting, and I couldn't get everything in place to move quick enough with the different shopping trends. So unfortunately, I had to close the store down. I probably left it too long to make that decision. And yeah, didn't use all my analysis skills throughout running a business, probably used more emotional, which, yeah, you pay a price for, but I learned a lot. So then I found myself without a job, and I had a lot of debt from closing the shop. I wasn't able to sell it. So I started looking at what I could get back into in terms of IT. There were probably 3 roles that I was looking for: project management office administrator, and business analyst roles. The business analyst roles in particular appealed to me. I have never been called a business analyst in my role, and I would like to come back to that later on because I learned a valuable lesson on one of your tips and hints. So I started applying for those 3 areas. I've always probably had a passion for analysis and really enjoy that aspect of it. I've done project management work. I probably didn't feel confident getting back into that arena after so long out of it. And then I probably started selling myself short by looking at being a PMO administrator. Maybe that was my kind of comfort, where I was starting off, where I was well and truly qualified to do that work. And I thought possibly that's where I could start and then move on.
So, and I see that happen often when people take a break. It's like they assume they need to step back, right? Instead of bringing forward, like you ran a business, and you had this IT experience, right? So often, you can kind of reposition it as more of a laddering and a evolution, as opposed to this retreat.
Confidence. I'm a very confident person, but I did not have my confidence. So that's probably what drove that. And when you look at business analyst roles, I think we mentioned this before, there's so much breadth to the business analyst role. So when you actually start looking at, different positions available, that can also tend to, for you maybe not to focus there, because it, like, you can get really kind of traditional BA roles. I'm much more systems focused, but that's purely because of my experience and my background. I started off in computer programming many years ago and then moved through like to systems analyst.
Yeah.
So I think that can be daunting as well, because it doesn't have one JD. It's got like many descriptions.
Yes.
And you might start looking at some and think that you are just not qualified, or you don't have the experience. But there's so much breadth in that area that you really need to keep looking and keep asking questions.
Yeah.
But what I did do, and I am very, very grateful for, is I found your website. So I closed my business in July 2016. I started work March 2017. And I probably should have gone back on the dates, but it was early 2017 that I picked up on your course. But before that, I had been reading through your website. And what resonated with me was it was so approachable. It was easy to read. I didn't feel daunted in any way. And the more I read, the more I knew I was doing the right thing by following like what you were saying, your recommendations. Doing the course back then was a really hard decision for me to make, because I had very limited financial resources. I was getting we call it the dole, which is a shocking name, but it's like payments from the government. I hated doing that. That was horrible, but I had to have some money coming in.
Yeah.
So it was a difficult decision, but I felt like it was the right decision. I took the option of just doing the materials only and working on it through home. And that once I had made the decision, I was comfortable that I had done the right thing. And once I started work, and there's a little bit of a story in that as well. So I had applied for many roles. I also was applying for a lot more government roles, which had never been, like, I'd done government consulting work before, but I had never really aimed to work for the government. But again, it was all about security. After being very insecure for so many years, I thought that this would be a nice, safe, secure environment for me to work in. And I probably wasted some time on applications, because that now I'm not in that area. I'm so glad that I didn't take a government role. But I applied for a project management officer or administrator with a small consulting firm. I didn't actually know how small, and I didn't realize they were a startup as well. They kind of like glossed over that. And in the conversation, in the interview that I had, I know Mike quite well now, he actually read a lot more into what I was capable of doing, and he offered me a business analyst role. So I was like, yes, this is excellent. And then went home and freaked out, like, how am I going to do this? But I had I had all my material from your course. So that gave me confidence, or that gave me something that was there and tangible, that, I knew I could do this work, but I just needed to build my confidence up.
Yeah, just to have that reference tool of, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, right? Like, because the class specifically that you took is the BA Essentials Masterclass, which walks you through the 8-step process. So kind of, I can see kind of that referring back to, well, what do I do next? Or I think I should be doing this, right? But is it just having that kind of reference tool to confirm too? Is that kind of was that your experience? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah, no, that was exactly it. And it was also for me terminology. I'd been talking about food and health and organics and all of that for so many years, that I was really concerned that I'd go into a session or a meeting and I wouldn't know what terminology to use. This is just my self-doubt, which is in hindsight a bit ridiculous, but that was seriously what I was going through, and it was quite a lot for me, even though I am a confident person. It was that was quite hard to overcome and get back in. But once I got on my way, I landed the most challenging program of work. It was crazy, and I was across like between 5 and 7 different projects, and working for a not-for-profit organisation where they didn't have a lot of funding and a lot of money, so not a big corporate. So yeah, I was stretched in every direction.
So you were in a small consulting company, but consulting for a nonprofit? Is that?
Yes, that's
Wow.
correct.
Yeah. Yeah. So what were kind of some of the projects like?
So the not-for-profit was across aged care, disability, mental health and youth services. So a community services organisation. They had, in some cases, quite old systems, in some cases, no systems. So the program of work covered going out to tender for human resources, the community services kind of system that would manage their funding and service provision of aged care and the other services that I mentioned. Records management, finance, payroll was the only system they weren't touching, but we ended up re-implementing and reconfiguring their payroll system.
Wow.
They needed an award interpreter. We need those in Australia to manage paying people correctly, the right kind of allowances, overtime and things like that. So we need an award interpreter. A new intranet, a new intranet, revised intranet, and website content management system. So, and then they also wanted a business intelligence tool.
Wow.
And they wanted to do that all at once. So my responsibilities as the BA was, well, we started off with, the company that I was working with came from an oil and gas background, which was like completely 180 degrees to what we were working with. And they had methodologies that they were used to working with and terminology that they were used to working with. It was different from what I had been exposed to. And back then I was like, oh my goodness, is this the way people talk nowadays? Like, is this the new terminology? I now understand that it was very industry specific. And I have since, my last project that I've just finished was oil and gas, and they speak their own language. So once I identified that, I felt a lot more secure, and going back to the materials that you had provided. So that was like, yes, this is what people talk. And just the project manager and the program director were just speaking oil and gas. So so we needed to do solution scope of work, requirements definition, the tender documentation, the vendor and systems evaluation, the testing, configuration, and the implementation. So when you look at that across all of those systems that I mentioned, it was an amazing amount of work to do.
Yeah. And you were there for 3 or 4 years? Yeah.
No. So I was there for 18 months. And then provided support once I'd finished up. There was a lot of data migration and systems integration work that I also had to do as well.
Yeah. So what was like a day in the life of that like?
Well, for starters, they worked. Their offices were at the back of a town which is kind of on the outskirts of Perth, and you almost feel like you're in rural country. So that was like a 45-minute drive for me, and you felt like you're out in the sticks, like it was surrounded by bush. And so that in itself was very different. The people that I was working with were amazing. Like, I think if you haven't worked in the community services sector before, or the human services sector before, it is quite an eye-opener that these people are out there supporting us with disability, with aged care. So that was quite different for me. And the people themselves were unsophisticated in terms of technology and I guess computer literacy, not in any other ways, and I'm not demeaning them in any way, but just not a lot of technology focus. So a typical day for me in that environment was often a number of sessions across a number of those projects. And looking back now, I'm very proud of what I achieved. And I don't know whether it was the 7 years out of IT that, or the absolute need to make this work, because it was my re-entry back into the workforce. But I amazed myself. I was able to, walk out of one session and mentally prepare myself to walk into another session on a completely different project, sometimes back to back or with half an hour in between, or so I'm quite proud of myself in being able to achieve that.
Yeah.
And I think that was my strength, is that I could just mentally regather myself and prepare myself for the next project.
Yeah, and it sounds like you just kind of jumped in and started running. Is that how it felt too?
Oh, yeah.
Because as a consultant, it's not like they're like, oh, take a next month to ramp up. It's sort of like you need to go in and be effective day one, right?
Yeah, and I guess that same whole old, what I keep referring to, which is trying to build my confidence, was that was always like snapping at my heels, like, you need to do this right. It wasn't, I was working for a new company. I was re-entering the workforce and working for this new client. And it was by no means easy, but the people I was working with that they were really great. So they were very supportive. And I actually just lost myself in work for quite some time. And maybe I needed that because I found it quite difficult closing down my business. So I think there was a lot of angst and whatnot with that. So to have this complete mind shift and to have something that was a project that was so all-consuming was probably quite therapeutic for me.
Yeah. So we do, as I mentioned kind of before we got started, we get a lot of questions from people who have some sort of break, whether like you weren't really on break, right? You were running a business, but who feel like they have this gap between working in IT or doing business analysis or doing something like that and then coming back. So what advice would you give to somebody who's like at that moment that you were between 2016 and 2017, right? And like trying to figure out what their next step is and how to get back into the workforce after a break like that?
I guess you need to work on the self-doubt and confidence, because don't let that hold you back.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned before, and I'm not trying to sell you, but I am actually extremely grateful that you were there with the tools and the words and the approachability, because that really did help me. Even just recently, like I'm in a position now where the last project is finished and I need to look for work. Even reading through your tips for preparing your resume, even something as simple as there's one article that talks about looking at your CV and the role and the positions that you held previously, that you can actually, you're actually renaming them. And that was a massive eye opener for me. And probably I must have missed that article. I don't know if it was if it's recent. I missed that 3 years ago, because when I looked at my CV, I was using roles that I was given in the company that could be not meaningless to other people, but could be a myriad of different roles in other organizations. So I was actually National Manager of Web Applications, which sounds really fancy, but I was very hands-on in that role. But when I read your article just recently, I've changed that now to Web Applications I think I've changed it to Business Analyst / Web Applications Manager or something like that, because I did a lot of BA work, but I didn't recognize it at the time. I guess for people that haven't done that role before, you just really need to look at what you have done and what you can bring to the table without kind of getting caught up in the ad that you're looking at. Might be very structured and might use the right terminology, but when you really sit down and think hard, and I had to do that just recently last week, and I also had to do that quite often 3 years ago, and you start unpacking what you have done and what you can bring to the table, you are quite surprised that you inherently probably have the skills and some experience.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's the answer to your question.
I think that's great advice. Really owning your skills, right? And your aptitudes and the experiences that you've had.
Yes.
And I'd like to add to that, and it sounds like this was your experience, like the business analysis experience you had was still relevant, right? So that 6-year gap of maybe you weren't doing as much like IT related business analysis because you were running your business, but you were still able to hit the ground running with a bit of a refresh in terms of the course. And then, but like, it's kind of like riding a bike, right? Like
yes.
It comes back. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or a horse, because I love riding horses.
Oh,
I don't get to do it very often, but
That's awesome.
you get back on that horse.
I don't know that I'm that good at a horse that I would like get on it and feel comfortable after a few minutes. But yes, I can appreciate that. All right. Very cool. Is there anything else that you would like to share?
For other people, I just believe in yourself and have confidence in yourself.
Yeah.
It is so easy to, if you have been out of work for a while or you've been in a different environment, it is quite challenging, particularly I think in IT, where it's quite a fast-paced industry, terminology changes, and methodology gets me quite often, like even back then and particularly now, everyone's looking for agile BAs, and I don't have that. My methodology experience is old-fashioned, waterfall, and people have moved away from that. So again, that's probably another factor to consider is rather than putting it out there that you used old-fashioned methodologies, I kind of reworded the way, and I also talked about in my covering letter that I can pick up things quite quickly and methodologies. And when you get down to it, a methodology is a methodology. It is a guideline for you to work within, and it gives you tools. But yeah, you can pick different methodologies up. I'm still not sure how to get into the agile world, but maybe I don't need to be.
Yeah, I think the enterprise experience you have with all those different tools and those major projects, I mean, that is going to be very appealing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just final question. I know it was, I did not appreciate or know the significance of the investment that you made when you made it until you shared it in this interview. But I mean, that was a significant financial investment at the time, and just wanted to say thank you for that, and for yourself too, like the investment that you made in yourself. And where do you think you would be if you had made a different decision and not made that investment?
I could have ended up being, and I don't want to demean the role, but I could have ended up in project administration and being quite frustrated because I was capable of a lot more.
Yeah.
And maybe that would have been seen, or maybe that would not have been appreciated, because you have to be quite careful in a company when you do take on a role, and you stick within your role to some degree. But no, it definitely gave me the confidence to move forward. And I drove home all the way from that office in Midvale, got on my computer at home, pulled up like the course material, and like, I can do this, like, just read through it, I can do this, because like I was responsible for doing I didn't do all the requirements across all those projects. That we had a lot of SMEs or subject matter experts that was really their responsibility, but some of them were very poorly written. And I scurried home and looked up requirements definition, and so yeah, it just gave me confidence and a level of comfort that I really needed at the time. And I am now so grateful, because I realized that BA work I absolutely love doing analysis work and working in this environment, even though there are so many different aspects to it. And my story is more about systems, and probably, working on systems and implementing new systems. Other people have, there's, like we were saying, there's so much breadth to the roles.
Right.
But yeah, I'm loving what I'm doing.
Awesome.
I'm going to try really hard to do the blueprint course. I'm quite excited about that because I think that will also help me, because that starts getting down to probably not the step-by-step through the process, but the tools and the skills. And I may have some of them, but it's going to definitely help me get some depth to them.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing that, Julie. And I'm so excited to see where you go and where you land next.
I will be in touch.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura.